Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all here to Gettysburg National Military Park. My name is Ranger Dan Welch, and this is our next installment of our winter lecture series. And as always, we're grateful to have you with us and that you've chosen to spend part of your weekend here with us today. And our great speaker we'll tell you a little bit more about in just a moment. Before we begin, though, I want to give you several reminders. First and foremost, if you have one of those wonderful things we all carry with us, to make sure you get those on silent or vibrate to not interrupt the program today. Also, if you've missed any of the lectures, this is, believe it or not, only our second weekend so far, but it seems like we've been at it for a lot longer. But if you've missed any of them, last weekend's or yesterday's, you can view all of them online via the Gettysburg Foundation YouTube account. I'd also like to encourage you to return next week as the Winter Lecture Series continues. Saturday, we'll have a presentation by Ranger Philip Brown of Eisenhower National Historic Site. He's going to be looking at Eisenhower and the Battle of the Bulge, which this year is the 80th anniversary of the Bulge. Next Sunday, a week from today, we have Ranger Tom Holbrook, and he's going to present on a program titled The Principles of Civil War Field Artillery. So if you're a little sketchy about how all those guys load and fire a cannon, everybody's individual roles and the sizes and the ammunition and the fuses and all that good stuff, you won't want to miss that program. And as always, these programs are free and open to the public. With that, we are honored to have with us today Wayne Motts, President Emeritus and historian of the Gettysburg Foundation. Many of you know Wayne, and he likely requires no introduction amongst this crowd. He's a prolific author and writer. Among his titles are Pickett's Charge, a history and guidebook, which he co-wrote with Jim Hessler. He's a dedicated researcher, a passionate speaker on subjects related to the American Civil War, and he has made preservation, protection, and appreciation of the Gettysburg and its story his life's work. This has been a journey that has taken him from the ranks of the Licensed Battlefield Guides, the director of the Adams County Historical Society, president of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, and the helm of the Gettysburg Foundation, the nonprofit partner of the National Park Service. And Wayne asked me to not leave out 37 years this year? 37 years as a licensed battlefield guide here at Gettysburg. For the past 4 years, those of us in the green and gray have been able to work alongside Wayne here in the Museum and Visitor Center, and he has played just a critical role in helping to advance our mission. So once again, will you please join me in welcoming Wayne Motts to the Winter Lecture Series.
All right, let's make sure I got the microphone. I tend to talk loud. They're all going to have to turn it down. Thank you, everybody, and thank you so much, Dan. I'm honored to be here with you this afternoon. Thanks to all of you that are here. And Dan, you forgot to mention, and I know you are too, the most number one important thing for today's talk, that he's a Buckeye, and so are you. So for today's talk, the Michigan folks, I got Michigan right up front. Gentleman poking me right in the eye here at the beginning with Michigan right up front. Of course, we did Michigan last year, and I asked Chris Gwynn. I'm just so grateful that Chris Gwynn, the Chief of Interpretation Education, asked me to be with you all. I'm great and honored to join this lineup. Really appreciate that. For Buckeyes at Gettysburg, Wayne Motts' native home state. And what we're going to do, everybody, is we're going to talk about Ohio's role at Gettysburg in the Civil War. We're going to do a little overview of that, but we're going to spend most of the time, which is what I always like to do, talking about stories related to the Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg. And I have 6 men that are Ohioans that we're going to talk about. We're going to profile 5 of them, but I've got basically 6 men that we're going to talk about here today. I always dedicate my programs almost every time. So for this program, I'd like to dedicate it to the commanding officer of the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment, Richard Long, Jr. of the 11th Union Army Corps. And Colonel Long was living in my hometown, which at the outbreak of the Civil War only had 540 people in it, in central Ohio, near Columbus, near the state capital. My native place is called Groveport. It is 10 miles southeast of Columbus, Ohio, the state capital, right smack dab in the center of the state. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Colonel Long as we go on for today's presentation. Now, There's a lot of great works on the battlefield of Gettysburg, and talking about Buckeyes at Gettysburg. If you don't have this book, and you've got to buy it used now, if you want to learn more about Buckeyes at Gettysburg, this is the go-to read. So Buckeyes at Gettysburg, and it's Richard Bumgardner, Buckeye Blood, Richard Bumgardner. He's deceased now, but this book was put out in 2003. You can buy it on the used book market. Richard wrote a number of books on the American Civil War, and this book is worth owning not only because it details what Ohio did here at Gettysburg, but there are many, many rare and unpublished photographs in this book. And so if you're interested in the Buckeye State in the battle, this is going to be something that you should go to. For today's presentation, the sources are varied here. And when it comes to the stories, I've tried to give as much of the primary materials, get as much of the primary materials related to the stories here as we could. The service records, pension records, and the stories of the men who fought and died here in the Battle of Gettysburg. So some of the things that are here in the presentation today, you're going to see for the first time. No one has seen some of these things, although they've been lying around in the musty archives for over a century. And so hopefully they'll be an integral part of the story to get you excited about it. And stories is where it's at, everybody. You want to teach people about the Civil War? Tell them a story. It's just as simple as that. So let's talk a little bit about Ohio in the war. So we know the population of the country, about 31 million people. That's north and south. And about 2 million people in the state of Ohio. Now what's interesting is that Columbus, the state capital, is a smaller city. Even today, Cleveland and Cincinnati, these are huge. Now, Columbus is growing because it's right in the center of the state, but at the Civil War, Columbus had less than 19,000 people in it. Cincinnati is a huge metropolitan city. It's got 161,000 people in it. It's got a huge foreign population at the time of the American Civil War. It's very much a big melting pot. And Cleveland as well had a free black population of over 36,000. And it had, once the war started, a total of about 620,000 military-age males. And I can tell you that Ohio fielded over 320,000 soldiers in the Civil War. It is number 3 on the list of Union states to supply soldiers in the war, followed by New York and Pennsylvania. And that makes sense, right? Because everybody who's living out in California, nobody, right? I mean, anybody want to guess what the population of Los Angeles was about 1861? I think it's around 4,000 people. Okay, I mean, small. You're in a lot of these states. There just isn't anybody there. And Ohio's got a huge participation of soldiers. Now, here's some more facts that we have. 320,000 I mentioned. 234 different regiments, 29 companies, 27 batteries of artillery in the war, and there were at least 7,000 Ohio soldiers killed in action. These are men that were killed in action. These aren't men that died of disease. And by the way, all these stats I'm mentioning are Ohio soldiers in Ohio units. So if you are in a U.S. regular Army unit or you're from the state of Ohio fighting in a different state, you're not in any of this total. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those today. She is the mother of generals. You always hear Ohio's the mother of presidents, the mother of U.S. presidents. She is the mother of generals in the Civil War. All the top hierarchy of generals in the Civil War are all Buckeyes, and you can see some of their names up there. Fighting McCook family, for those of us that are Ohioans, out in Carroll County, Ohio, that's in the eastern part of the state. They had 14 members of their family that were soldiers in the Civil War, and 4 of them were general officers in the Union Army in the Civil War. Ohio had 2 POW camps, Camp Chase in Columbus, and it also had Johnson Island Prison up on Lake Erie that was a POW camp designated for officers, Confederate officers in the war. Isaac Trimble was a resident there at one time. Notice how I said that. You're in Ohio and you're a resident. You know what I mean? POW, they're residents. And who else? James Archer. James Archer and many other Gettysburg Confederate soldiers captured at Gettysburg officers went up to Lake Erie, Johnson's Island Prison, which is now near the amusement park at Cedar Point, if any of you are familiar with the geography of Ohio. Training camps all over the state. And the railroad runs right through the central part of the state. If you want to get troops from the west, from Illinois, Indianapolis, places like that, you got to go through Ohio, and you go through Columbus, everybody, on the railroad. So railroad, very important. Politically, Ohio had governors that were very friendly to President Lincoln, and trying to get troops and other things politically for Lincoln, very helpful for the Buckeye state to be aligned a lot with some of these politics. Not the whole state is aligned like that, I can tell you. You're trading down along the Ohio River. You don't want an American Civil War down there because you're trading with the South, right? And you definitely go across the river and join Confederate units in the Civil War. If you are famous, every state wants to claim you. Every state. Now, I went up to Albany, New York. I'm on a research trip, and what is up there outside the State House? I'm going to pick on New York here for a minute. Phil Sheridan. Now, Phil Sheridan says that he's born up in Albany. He's probably born in Ireland or on the boat, ladies and gentlemen. But do you know how long he's in Albany? About 1 year. And then he moves to Ohio. He's there 1 year. Look at this statue. No, New York, no Empire State. We're not going to give you Phil Sheridan, and you can't have him. This is what it looks like. By the way, this statue is beautiful of Phil Sheridan up there, so I can pick on that, but I'm telling you, and the sculptor is John Quincy Adams Ward, who just took the license guide test. What sculptor on the Gettysburg battlefield did John Quincy Adams Ward do? He did a sculpture right here on the Gettysburg battlefield. Reynolds in the cemetery. The portrait statue to John Fulton Reynolds in the cemetery was done by the same sculptor that did this sculpture of Phil Sheridan. Now, we've got a better one, folks, and it's in Somerset, Ohio. Right there it is. My co-author, Jim Hessler, who's in the room, he's helped me out on many occasions, including this talk. One time he and I, in a single day, went to Lancaster, the home of William Tecumseh Sherman, because that's right near my native home. Then we went over and saw Phil Sheridan, and then we went to see Custer's birthplace all in the same day, because they're very, very close to each other. But Phil Sheridan's got a beautiful statue there in Somerset, Ohio. So if you're famous, everybody wants you. If you're notorious, no one wants you. And if you're ordinary, no one cares, ladies and gentlemen. And that's about how it boils down to, or nobody knows about you. And we're going to show you some Ohioans. We're not going to cover Ohioans that you know today. And we'll show you one, that's the most famous one that was here at Gettysburg. But did you know that Ohio had six generals in the American Civil War in the Confederate Army? And there they all are, right there. All those men right there are born in the state of Ohio, and they were all Confederate generals in the American Civil War. This man, Straw, whoops, ooh boy, let's hope I can get that back. Let's see, there we go. Straw right here, he died at the Battle of Franklin on November 30th, 1864, leading Confederate troops. And Robert Hatton right here was shot in the head, leading Confederate troops at the Battle of Fair Oaks on the peninsula. Two of those men were killed in action, leading Confederate soldiers as Buckeye Confederate generals in the Civil War. Roswell Ripley, right over here, married into Charleston aristocracy. He actually commanded Charleston, South Carolina troops in the Civil War. There's a sure way to get jammed up. Just change sides if your wife's a Southerner, everybody. So he doesn't do that, right? He stays with the Confederacy, and he is buried in Magnolia Cemetery in Charleston, South Carolina. On his grave, it says, born in Worthington, Ohio, right near Columbus. That's where he's from. He's a native Ohioan. So all six of these men, Ohio soldiers, and ironically, Daniel Reynolds and Straw were both classmates at Ohio Wesleyan College in the state of Ohio. So they're not only natives, they were educated in the state of Ohio, and most of these men then move south. They take jobs, they become like attorneys, they all move south. And let's talk a little bit about, so these are all non-Gettysburg, this is all non-Gettysburg. Let's talk a little bit about Gettysburg and tell you a little bit about, there's 19 Ohio organizations in the Battle of Gettysburg. There are 42 counties of 88. Ohio's got 88 counties. We're 41,000 square miles. We're smaller than Pennsylvania, but we got a lot more counties because they're smaller. That's here. They're all over the battlefield for the 3 days of the battle, and the casualty number of men engaged is about 4,400. So that puts Ohio like 5th on the list of northern states. Now the regulars are stuck in there. They've got more troops as well that are here. And the Ohio deaths, 262 with 131 being over in the National Cemetery. We have 2 generals in the Battle of Gettysburg, 2 of them, that are affiliated with Ohio. And everybody knows who the number 1 guy is, right? We all know that. And here again, when we did Michigan, Monroe tries to claim him. We're not going to let Monroe have him either, everybody. So New Rumley, Ohio is where George Custer was born on December 5th, 1839. That's here. And he is the only Ohio-born general in the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, one of the other generals, who's actually born in the state of New York, moved to Ohio and took over the Soldiers' Home in Dayton, Ohio, and he is buried in the National Cemetery at the Soldiers' Home, Dayton, Ohio, and that would be Marcina Patrick, the provost marshal here in the Battle of Gettysburg, classmate of George Gordon Meads for the class of 1835. So we got 2 general officers that have Ohio affiliations, only one of them actually born there, and that would be George Armstrong Custer in the eastern part of the state. Now, let's talk a little bit about the battle for July 1st. We all know what happened out there on July 1st. This man will be one of the lead brigades of infantry in Henry Heath's division on July 1, 1863, advancing north of the railroad cut. Joseph R. Davis, the nephew of the President of the Confederacy. Anybody want to guess where he went to school? What's the title of the talk? Buckeyes at Gettysburg, right? Did you know that Joe Davis actually went to school at Miami of Ohio, the 2nd oldest university in the state of Ohio? This man went to school there, went to college in the state of Ohio. And he's leading the brigade north of the railroad cut on the first day's battle at Gettysburg against what will be later known as the Iron Brigade. Now, the Iron Brigade arrives on the battlefield, goes into McPherson's Woods, you know the story, except for the 6th Wisconsin. That unit is held in reserve at the seminary. And when it's needed, it's pushed in to go across the Chambersburg Pike and strike the Confederates that are in where the railroad cut area is, just on the western edge of town. And the man leading it, the head of the 6th Wisconsin in the Battle of Gettysburg, also a native Ohioan. Rufus Dawes is from Marietta, Ohio, and there are many people in the Iron Brigade that are from different places, everybody, other than Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana. They're from different places. We've got a lot of Ohioans that are in there, and Rufus Dawes is one of them. Now, he's going to lead this column right across the railroad cut. Here's a map, so you can see it, thanks to American Battlefield Trust. Whoops. Boy, I got to get better at this, don't I? Here's the Lutheran Seminary, right over here. Here's the 6th Wisconsin, the right of this line, and here's a little detail of it, going up against Joe Davis's brigade that is now seeking cover, ladies and gentlemen, inside the railroad cut on the morning of July 1st, 1863. So this would be early in the morning, 10:30, 11 o'clock, 11:30, somewhere around in there. And one of the soldiers involved in this is going to be a Medal of Honor recipient, Francis Wallar, Company I of the 6th Wisconsin Infantry Regiment, who happens to be not from Wisconsin, but from the state of Ohio, everybody. He actually moves to Wisconsin, but he is a native Ohioan. He was the son of Virginia natives David Wallar and Mariah Griffin Wallar, and he was born August 15, 1840. He is 22 years old in the Battle of Gettysburg. And you can find out where these people lived. You can go on and look at the census record and determine where they're at. His birthplace is in Guernsey County, Ohio, and he tells us actually where he is, which is in the eastern part of the state. And then by 1850, he is down at Hocking County. This is him right here, Francis A. Wallar, his brother Samuel. He had several brothers, by the way, in the Union Army in the Civil War. Samuel was standing right next to him in the 6th Wisconsin, right on the edge of the railroad cut. Both these guys are Ohio natives. And then the family is going to move out when he's about 18 years old. So he spends all his formative years, all of them, out there in Ohio, and then he's going to move out to Wisconsin. And these folks are farmers, so what they're looking for out there is land. So here's the 1860 census, and he is living, it says Asbury, that's his middle name, Francis Asbury Wallar. I wonder if the family might have been Presbyterian because Francis Asbury is one of the first 2 bishops of the Methodist Church in the entire United States. So my guess is that he's named after a Methodist bishop. And this is him, and it says farm labor, and that's his brother George in the upper corner. And Bad Axe County, Wisconsin, ladies and gentlemen, is now Vernon County. Don't you hate it when they change names? You go to a map and it's not there. That's because it doesn't exist anymore. It's now Vernon County, Wisconsin. And so when the Civil War breaks out, Francis Wallar is going to join the 6th Wisconsin Infantry Regiment, and he's going to be charging the railroad cut on July 1 as a member of this unit. And right here, here's the 6th Wisconsin Memorial, right up here, 95th New York, railroad cut. I'm sure all of you have been along this view. They're going to charge and go right up against where the members of Joe Davis's brigade are, down inside where this cut is on the morning of July 1st, 1863. And the color bearer of the 2nd Mississippi Infantry Regiment plants the flag right here on the edge of this railroad cut, and there's a beautiful print because Francis Wallar is going to take it out of his hands to get the Medal of Honor. You can get a Medal of Honor in the Civil War or capture a flag. That's the best way and the usual way. It's not the only way to get one, but many of the Medals of Honor issued here in the Battle of Gettysburg are issued for capturing a flag, and Francis Wallar is going to take the flag out of the color bearer's hands of the 2nd Mississippi on July 1st. This is a hand-to-hand fight along here, and they are actually wrestling with the flag. And Civil War artist Don Triani did a wonderful print, and I asked if he would send me a high-resolution image of it so I could include it in the program for you all today, but this is what it looks like right here. And this is based on an actual account. What's amazing about this is Francis Wallar, our Ohio native from Guernsey County right here, and William Murphy, the color bearer of the 2nd Mississippi. What's amazing about this is both these men survived this incident on July 1. Everybody's falling around them, and these guys end up surviving the Battle of Gettysburg. Here, John Johnson of the 6th Wisconsin says, quote, "As I arrived at the edge of the railroad cut, I saw the rebel color sergeant stick the end of the flagstaff into the ground and was holding it with both hands. Lewis Eggleston, one of my messmates, who I loved as a brother, also had a hold of the staff and was trying to wrestle it out of his hand. Seeing other rebels raising their guns as if to shoot a bayonet at Eggleston, I stepped in front of him and raised my musket to defend him as best I could. While thus in an act of striking, I received a wound." Several people around this trying to grab the flag. And then Wallar is going to come forward. He's described by Murphy as a big man. Now, Murphy doesn't know who he is. That's the color sergeant in the Confederate Army right there to your right that you see. And I think Murphy, he might have been, I think he was a corporal. He's promoted like after Gettysburg. And he says this, "Just about the time a squad of soldiers rushed my colors and our men did their duty. They were all killed or wounded, but they still rushed for the colors with one of the most deadly struggles of the war that was ever witnessed in any battle of the war. They still kept rushing for my flag, and there were over a dozen of them shot down. The first soldier was shot down just as he made his way to the flag, just to my right, and at the same time, a lieutenant made a desperate struggle for the flag and was shot through the right shoulder. Over a dozen men were killed or wounded, and then a large man rushed forward for the flag. As I tore the flag from the staff, he took a hold of me and the colors. The firing was still going on, and we kept this up until several minutes when the flag was taken from me." So Murphy tries to pull this thing off the staff so he can hide it in his clothing, have it in his clothing, and get off the battlefield with it. when Francis Wallar comes in and takes it. And eventually this flag is given to Rufus Dawes, the commanding officer of the 6th Wisconsin. It's wrapped around a wounded soldier who's sent to the rear to the hospital, and he's told to take care of that flag, and that flag ends up in the War Department as a captured war trophy. And in 1905, this exact flag that Francis Wallar, our Ohio native, and William Murphy, our Mississippian, wrestled over was returned to the state of Mississippi, where it is today in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. And I got this photo from them. This is the original flag that Wallar and Murphy wrestle over. It's a beautiful painted color flag. It's got the captured War Department number 40 right on it, right there. And the folks at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History allowed me to use it today from their collection. On December 1st, 1864, Wallar gets the Medal of Honor very early in the Civil War. His citation reads, "The capture of the 2nd Mississippi flag." That's all it says. Doesn't need any more to that. And this medal ended up in the Vernon County Historical Society in western Wisconsin, where it was stolen in 1977. And then it was returned to the Historical Society in 1991. And the staff up there sent me these pictures of it. So this is the original medal issued to him. Now this is the 1904 design. Wallar dies after the Civil War, and he had all 3 designs of the Medal of Honor. There are 3 of them that are designed for this time in the Civil War. You're supposed to turn the medal in when you get another design. And the Historical Society does not have the other previous 2 versions of this medal, but they do have this one, and it actually is inscribed to him, Company I, 6th Wisconsin, Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863. So, and then later in life, he's going to move, he survives. Francis Wallar survives the American Civil War. He goes back to Wisconsin. He's married in Wisconsin, becomes a farmer there, and he stays there 20 years after the Battle of Gettysburg. And in 1883, he moves out to South Dakota, Spink County, South Dakota, and he actually dies in South Dakota. This is an image of him. Now this, I'm not sure this is the medal. This could be a GAR medal. They look so close together, but the Historical Society sent me this later picture of him as well. But he dies in 1911, having 6 children, and he has an annual pension at the date of his death. I want you to think about this. Now, he's got disabilities, he's got diarrhea, he's got a lot of disabilities. A lot of these Civil War soldiers had disabilities. His annual pension, which was given to him at the date of his death, the total of his pension was $15 a month. That's about $500 a month today. Nobody got rich on Civil War pensions. You couldn't really live on them. And if you can't do manual labor, ladies and gentlemen, you probably can't work after the Civil War. Think about that. We can't retrain these people to go into computer jobs like we can for veterans today. Now, he amasses land holdings, and he becomes a very prominent farmer after the Civil War out in South Dakota. And here's his obituary. That's written from Vernon County in the sense that it says he was an ex-sheriff of the county before he moved out, but he was out in South Dakota for many years. His wife dies in 1897. Her body is taken back to Vernon County, Wisconsin. And when Wallar dies in 1911, his body is taken back to Vernon County, Wisconsin, his native place, and that is where he rests today. There is a plaque at the base of it that said, awarded the Medal of Honor by Congress for valor in the Battle of Gettysburg. So Francis Wallar, one of the 64 Medal of Honor recipients in the Battle of Gettysburg, credited to the 6th Wisconsin Infantry, is actually an Ohioan here. And so this is one of the first medals issued for Gettysburg, for one of the first actions in the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, you know, those men are all pushed back. Wallar survives this. Where does he go? Goes back over to toward Culp's Hill, right? Because the 6th Wisconsin, that's where they end up. Now you got July 2nd, 1863, and you're going to have skirmish fighting that's right in front of Cemetery Hill. The Union Army is going to fall back to Cemetery Hill. And a lot of those regiments up there, 9 of the 19 in the Union Army in the Battle of Gettysburg from Ohio, 9 of the 19 are in the Union 11th Army Corps. You had a lot of Ohioans in the Union 11th Army Corps. And Colonel Long, his regiment, the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment, is going to be one of the ones that's on West Cemetery Hill, out skirmishing in what is now the Colt Park neighborhood here at Gettysburg. And I didn't realize that Colonel Long, he's a native of Chillicothe, Ohio. I didn't realize he'd been living in my town. One of the battlefield guides had looked at a book and said, hey, I think this guy's living, what's that town you're from? He said, I think this guy's living in that town. So Chillicothe is where he's born. It's down here. We don't know very much about him. He's born in 1837, it looks like. And then my home place is right there. So he moves just north to where my home place is, and he is in the 1860 census in this small town that I grew up in, Groveport, Ohio, before the Civil War. And this is him in the census down here at the bottom. And we know this is him because this is his mother, Elizabeth Long, and his father had died and had sold some interest. And I think that the person that they're living with, William Ewing, is his uncle. And he was a pretty prominent merchant in my town and sold a lot of his business. And folks, let me tell you something. Boy, trying to research, that's how I know this because his mother is right here above him. But trying to research a last name like Long, give me a break. Give me a break. It ought to be Hessler, shouldn't it? David Malgi or something. We got to get names that are easier to research because Miller and Smith, forget it. So trying to look up a Richard Long, that's tough, Hey, and guess what? He's Richard Long Jr. If it was up to Wayne Motts, the historian, no one would be named the same as anybody else. Everybody would have a unique name so we could track you down and find you, ladies and gentlemen. But this is him in the 1860 census. And there's no occupation given there for him. And he is an older person. So I don't know what he's doing in 1860 up in my town. I have no idea. But he joins the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment. He becomes a commissioned officer in it. Then he becomes a lieutenant colonel. And in the Battle of Gettysburg, this is the brigade that belonged to Francis Barlow. And Francis Barlow is promoted to command the division. And Orland Smith, who's the colonel of the 73rd Ohio, is promoted to command the brigade. And that means Richard Long is going to be the commanding officer at the Battle of Gettysburg for the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment. Here are the three regiments along the Taneytown Road. The 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment monument is in the National Cemetery today. And they're skirmishing against Confederate troops that are in Long Lane and along a fence here that's probably one of the most contested fences in the battle, which is now right around where Fairview Avenue is in Colt Park in Gettysburg. So if you drive around Fairview Avenue in Colt Park, that's about where this is. And this is from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. I mean, you're skirmishing all the way in. This regiment in the Battle of Gettysburg has some 330-some men, and it loses 42% of its men in the Battle of Gettysburg. Anybody know what the percentage loss of the 20th Maine is? About 32%. This regiment lost 10% more than the 20th Maine in percentage loss, never fought in a line of battle in the Battle of Gettysburg. They're out on the skirmish line, and this was completely open. You stand out on Cemetery Hill today, you look out to the west, and you look out across what Colt Park is, you're looking neighborhood. In the Civil War, this is what you saw. And where it says George House over here, that's where John Reynolds' body was taken. That's the old-time photo shop today on Queen Street, okay? Bishop Barn is not there, but it's right by what would be there? Right near the Reliance Mine Saloon, just where the pool is, up from the pool at the Colton Motel, ladies and gentlemen. I think is what that is today. But look how open that is. And this is what they'll be skirmishing in for July 2nd and July 3rd. Now, when the 73rd Ohio, Richard Long, when they put their monument up, they put it on the Taneytown Road. September 14, 1887 is Ohio Day, when Ohio is putting up all the markers on the Gettysburg battlefield. And this one, Battlefield Guide Sue Boardman gave me this picture. You can notice the dirt's all disturbed here. There's no grass around here. I think this is when it first went up. I think this is like an 1887 image of this monument. This monument was struck by cars so many times that they had to move it inside the National Cemetery. And today, if you go out there and walk along the sidewalk, right past the Reliance Mine Saloon, or right near where the Reliance Mine Saloon is, you can still see the depression in the ground where the original location of the monument was. That's right here. You can see that. And then they moved it into the cemetery. And I think the movement was 1975, 1976. Nobody can seem to pin down exactly when it went into the National Cemetery. But today, the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment is inside the cemetery. Richard Long is with this unit from the beginning of the war all the way through the Battle of Gettysburg. And then he goes back to my hometown where he is ill. He's a pretty fragile guy from the records that we have. And when I pulled his service record at the National Archives, this letter was in it, and it was addressed from my hometown, right up here at the top. Groveport, Ohio, May 3rd, 1864. And it says that he has certain ailments, lesions of the brain, and he also had inflammation of his intestine. That's what it says. So he's put into staff duty, and then he will resign in 1864 because he is sick. And he'll go to Chicago, Illinois. He's there early after the American Civil War, and he becomes an inventor of numerous railroad patents, inventor of numerous railroad items, joists, things that are used on the railroad. And so he's pretty wealthy, becomes a pretty wealthy man. And he has several companies and several businesses all around. Well, in 1889, having lived in Chicago, he comes to Pittsburgh to go visit a friend of his because they're doing business together, and he's run over by a railroad train in downtown Pittsburgh. And no kidding. And this guy survives the entire Civil War is what happens to him. And this is out of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and it's April 5th, 1889. While walking along the railroad track from Sandusky to Federal Street on Allegheny, Colonel Richard Long, president of the Long Spring Trust Company of Chicago, was knocked down and injured so seriously that he may not recover. He had been stopping at the Duquesne Hotel at about 10 o'clock yesterday morning and boarded the Pleasant Valley car, which he left Sandusky Street to meet an appointment. James K. Vernon, the secretary of the Pittsburgh Forge and Iron Company, with who he had an engagement to take place. Now it says, a Fort Wayne engine backing in a westerly direction came up on before he was aware of it, knocked him down on the track. The engineer had not perceived him, but a cry was made and forced the engineer to reverse. Colonel Long was taken from his perilous position, was found to have had his face and one eye bruised, and his right hand severed from the arm, hanging but a shred of flesh. He was taken to the Allegheny General Hospital. Now, what's fascinating to me about, and I knew that Colonel Long was run over by a train. That's a fact you don't forget when you read about somebody. But how he died, I did not know. And it's very interesting. Here is a newspaper article about his death, and it says that he was addicted to morphine, and his system was broken down for the use of the drug. They had to give him so much morphine to ease this pain that a normal person with this injury would have reacted to that morphine and his pain would have been dulled. They gave him so much morphine, he died basically of that. And he died of an addiction of morphine. Now, I can't tell you how many soldiers were addicted to morphine in the Civil War, but a lot of them were. Doctors were addicted to this. This is an opium drug for which they don't know all the things that can do to you. And so, unfortunately, Colonel Long dies of this administering of morphine, and it says here, according to the head of the hospital, that had he been under normal conditions, he would have survived. He would have survived this wound. Unfortunately, he was a widower. He didn't have much of a family, and he was taken back to the Grandview Cemetery in Chillicothe, Ohio, where he is buried today. He is buried in the same cemetery that the rescuer of Richard Nixon's great-grandfather, Richard Enderlin, who got a Medal of Honor in the Battle of Gettysburg, also rests. Grandview Cemetery, pretty well-known place in Chillicothe, and he has a very small, undescript stone today. Colonel Richard Long from Wayne's hometown in the Civil War, dying basically of this overdose of morphine after having been wounded, having been sick in the Battle of Gettysburg. It says in the newspaper he was wounded. I don't think he was wounded in the Civil War either. I can't find any medical record where he was wounded. But he was sick, and he had a fragile constitution, and then apparently somehow got addicted to this morphine. Now, while he's skirmishing out along the Colt Park, remember, they're skirmishing on the evening of the 1st, they're into the 2nd, they're into the 3rd. On July 2nd, 1863, we've got Dan Sickles moving his troops out along to the Emmitsburg Road, and one of the battery commanders along the Emmitsburg Road. There's no Ohio troops out there with Andrew Humphrey's division on the right of Sickles' line. There's no Ohio soldiers in Ohio units, but there are closet Ohioans in there, and one of them is Francis Seeley. Seeley, who commanded an artillery battery right on the Emmitsburg Road for Andrew Humphrey's division of the 3rd Union Army Corps, is a native of Ashtabula, Ohio. This is where he's from, way up in the northeast part of the state. You like snow, folks? This is where you go, up there. No kidding about it. 26 years old. He's the same age as Colonel Long. He's born April 12, 1837, Francis Seeley. And his father was born in New York, as well as his mother, and he is the oldest, from what I can gather, of 11 children. He actually had looks like it would have been a half-brother named Elmer Ellsworth Seeley, who was born in 1861. Think about that. He's born in 1837. Looks like he's got a half-brother born in 1861. So he's one of 11 children. His mother dies in 1849, so he is 8 years old when his mother dies, and the family moves out to Wisconsin, then it moves to Minnesota. And we know that from the birth dates and the locations of the children. The children in the census record, it tells what state they're born in, so we can tell approximately when the family moved. In 1854, this family, Francis Seeley, is out in Minnesota. But from 1837 to 1854, all his formative years, Seeley's going to be a native of Ohio till he's 9, and then he's going to go out to Wisconsin and then on to Minnesota. So Minnesota is the state that normally is equated to him, given to him, but actually he is a native of Ohio. And in 1855, when he's a young man, he joins the U.S. Regular Army at Fort Snelling, Minnesota. If you haven't been to Fort Snelling, it's a beautiful place. It sits up on the bluff of the junction of the rivers up there. It's just, I guess it'd be the Minnesota and the Mississippi, right? The junction of the rivers that are there. And it's just beautiful there. So he joins an artillery battery, Battery C, 3rd United States Artillery Regiment, and becomes a soldier in the U.S. Regular Army. He's a private, corporal, sergeant, and he becomes first sergeant of the battery, and then he'll get a commission before the Civil War. This is pretty rare. So he gets a brevet to second lieutenant in 1860, and he gets a commission in February 1861, before the outbreak of the Civil War. Then he gets assigned down to Fort Pickens in Pensacola, Florida. He's actually court-martialed for burning a dock down in Pensacola, Florida, right at the outbreak of the Civil War. And then he's transferred to the 4th United States Artillery, where he is a first lieutenant in the Battle of Gettysburg with the 4th Artillery on July 2nd, 1863. Now, this battery, and I picked this for a reason, is right out, folks, where the Klingel Farm is. It's right next to it. You probably know that the foundation is assisting the park in raising funds to be able to rehabilitate the Klingel property. One of my friends here in the room, who's down here at the base, David Malgi, he and his wife Sherry gave a challenge grant to work on this with the park. Some of you in the room may be donors. This is an important project to redo the Klingel Farm. I know David gave his donation in memory of the men who fought around this property. And today we're going to cover some men that fought around this property, and I put it in there on purpose for that. It's important that these structures stay preserved. Park's got to work on this stuff all the time. Foundation's got to work on this stuff all the time. So Seeley's Battery is right out by the Daniel Klingel farm. It's first north, and then it's south of where the house is. And today, here's the battery plaque along the Emmitsburg Road, and here are the 6 Napoleons of Francis Seeley's Battery K of the 4th U.S. Artillery Regiment right next to the Klingel farmstead. And folks, this stuff needs to be preserved. I'm going to tell you what, in this room, I don't want it to look like this. Do you? At the Wentz house? The alternative is, this is what it looks like. So I'm for this. And hopefully we can help get that rehabilitated with everybody's help here, and I'm sure some of you may have already done that. You can visit the Foundation's website if you want to learn more about that project. You're getting Wayne Motts' commercial in the middle of the program now instead of at the end of the program. But this stuff's important to me, and I think about Seeley and all those men in Battery K and all the other 3rd Corps men fighting around this property on July 3rd, or July 2nd, excuse me. This is what it looked like. That's the Spangler farm in the background. He's probably up against the 11th Alabama Volunteer Infantry Regiment of Wilcox's brigade. That's what he's up against on July 2nd, 1863. So Wilcox's brigade is attacking, and Seeley is defending this line for July 2nd. And he has a letter to John Batchelder, our government historian, written in 1878, where he describes this action. Arrived on the field for the 2nd Division, 3rd Corps at 3 o'clock on the morning of the 2nd, unlimbered, inactive, near General Tyler's Artillery Reserve. Anybody know where that is? The Foundation's farm at the Spangler farm, right? The George Spangler farm. That's where the Artillery Reserve is. So that's where he is. Pursuant to orders from A.A. Humphreys, commanding 2nd Division, 3rd Corps, I was temporarily acting. I moved the battery in position at or near an orchard, and some very well-directed shots silenced the Confederate artillery battery. And he says to refer to Humphreys' report to talk about it. After silencing the enemy's battery, we were under heavy musketry fire for Longstreet, advancing the infantry. Our opponents also had some batteries, completely enfilading the battery in our front. As soon as the retiring infantry had cleared our path, we opened with good effect on the enemy. About this time, while superintending from the front service of the guns, I was severely wounded by a rifle musket shot high on my hip that shattered a portion of the bone. It stays on the field. He gets carried off the field, and then the artillery is moved off of this position behind where the Emmitsburg Road is located. Now, eventually, this is all going to get overrun, and the Confederates, of course, are going to set up shop right here. But if you pull Francis Seeley's pension record to take a look at what this wound is, it's terrible. Here's the report of Humphreys, and he talks about the admiration of Seeley's gallantry and judgment for the management of this battery. Seeley says Humphreys was bareheaded on a horse right near where the battery is. He describes that's where they're at. And I got the pension record down at the National Archives for Seeley, and he's struck in the left thigh by a shell from a contusion. Doesn't penetrate his skin. And then a bullet actually goes through his right leg. And there's the entrance of it, and here's the exit of it. This is what's drawn in the pension record of Francis Seeley, and what a horrific, horrific wound. He has to resign out of the service in 1864. He's in a hospital in Baltimore on July 5th. Then he says he gets on a railroad train and goes up to Deposit, New York, in southern New York, when he can't go any further. His wound is hurting him so bad he can't go any further than this. He goes to Ashtabula because he still has family apparently in that area, and he actually gets married in August of 1863 while he's up there recovering from his wound. But in 1864, Francis Seeley will resign because of this wound. He goes back out to his home in Minnesota, And while he's out of Minnesota, he'll become the postmaster out there. He becomes a state legislator for at least one term. And then in the 1900s, he actually moves out to California, actually goes out to California. His first wife dies in 1903, and he's probably in California in 1905. There's a letter in his pension record that says 1905, he moves out to California. And he dies in California in 1911. And this is his obituary. He dies in a place called Sawtell, California. That is a neighborhood of Los Angeles. There was a Union soldiers' home there today. And I've actually been out to see Seeley's grave. Seeley is buried in the Los Angeles National Cemetery. It's his grave there today. And it appears that when he died, he received a pension of $40 a month. And that's all he has. He doesn't have any money. And in his pension record, his old Corps commander, Dan Sickles, comes to his rescue. There is a letter inside Seeley's pension record that's dated in January of 1911. Now, been 1911. Seeley dies December 30th, 1910. December 30th, 1910. And in January, Dan Sickles writes to the Pension Bureau to see if they can do anything for Seeley's widow. Now, I tell you, I had to call in my friend and co-author Jim, who's here today. Luckily Jim can read Dan Sickles' writing because Wayne Motts can't. I mean, this is bad. And here's what it looks like, everybody. So, so I had to call out the heavy guns and get Jim to say, what does this thing say? And what's fascinating about this is it's cut off a little bit at the bottom. It says that he's lost one of his best artillery commanders, Seeley, and he mentions his name right here. And it said they've lived on, and Jim thinks, and I think he's right, this word is pittance. Pittance. But look what it says. I sent money to bury him. Dan Sickles sent money to bury Francis Seeley. And he's writing to the head of the Pension Bureau, give Mrs. Seeley more money. She didn't get more money. She got as much as, she actually got a special act of Congress, or he did prior to this, which was above and beyond what he could be rated at $40 a month. So you're not talking a lot of money here. She said she had to sell her cottage and move in with friends to pay all their debts. So this is a problem. After the Civil War, there's a lot of folks, they don't have any money. This also tells you a lot about Dan Sickles you don't know. Dan Sickles gets a bad rap all the time. Look at this. It's the reason why people like Dan Sickles. If you served under him, he's taking care of his men here. This is a side of Dan Sickles that you don't see. And this is real. This was never meant for publication, right? Dan Sickles, he doesn't know Wayne Motts is going to be showing this in his program here at the Gettysburg Foundation. All right, let's get to July 3rd because we got to rush our time here. So, Third Corps collapses. Who sets up right along the Klingel House? Right where Seeley's battery is located, the Louisiana Artillery, the famed Washington Artillery from the state of Louisiana is going to set up right next to the Klingel Farm. William Miller Owen is the adjutant for the Washington Artillery of New Orleans, Louisiana. This is a militia unit that was founded like in 1838. It's got huge history down in New Orleans. And William Miller Owen, along with his brother, ladies and gentlemen, Edward Owen, both of them are at Gettysburg. Both these men are at Gettysburg. Both of them are on the Emmitsburg Road. Both of them are right out by where the Klingel Farm is located. And both of them, folks, born in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where they're from. They're Ohioans. Now, their mother was a native of Louisiana. So they're born in the state of Ohio, in Cincinnati. Here they're shown on the census. Allison Owen, their father, their mother Caroline, born in Louisiana. And right here is William, and right here is Edward. Now, these men end up fighting for the Confederacy, and they end up down in New Orleans. They go to a private military academy at Gamber, Ohio, Gamber Military Academy, which is out near Kenyon College. Secretary of State William Seward went to Kenyon College. Remember, he's a native, not William Seward, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Edwin Stanton Edwin Stanton from Ohio, from near Steubenville, Ohio. Edwin Stanton goes to Kenyon College. These boys, they go to a military school, at least that's what it says, Gamber, Ohio, which is in the eastern part of Ohio. And in 1850, they're in the census. Their father runs a very prominent store. I pulled this ad. Look at this. And he describes everything: cigars, fruit, grapes. This is everything for sale in their father's store. And they're listed in 1850. Notice that William's listed as a clerk. So he's a clerk in his father's store who's a merchant. So that's what this looks like. And clear down here at the bottom it says he's got mess kits of mackerel. I'll pass on the fresh mackerel down here, everybody. But that's so when their father dies, they move to New Orleans. And there's different birth dates listed for William Miller Owen. And some of them is listed 1832, others list him as 1840, but he's an adult by the time they moved to New Orleans. They moved down to New Orleans, Louisiana. Here he is, and he is a clerk in a store in 1860 at age 26, born in Ohio in the First Ward of New Orleans. And that's his brother right below him, both of them here in the Battle of Gettysburg. And it said he became a broker for a cotton firm too as well. But here he is. This is him in the store. And here's a great image. Boy, the Confederate Memorial Hall in New Orleans. If you haven't been there, folks, it is packed full of great Confederate artifacts. It is well worth seeing. These men were drivers for Confederate Memorial Hall. And here's an image of the two of them, hand-colored. So this is Edward, and this is William, right there. Both of them in the Battle of Gettysburg, both of them natives of Ohio, both of them from New Orleans, Louisiana at the time of the Civil War. So that's a hand-colored images of them. And William Miller is the author of the History of the Washington Artillery. So you can download this on Google Books, In Camp and Battle, the History of the Washington Artillery. And here are the 4 batteries of the Washington Artillery, and right there's the Klingel House. So Jim and I have spotted them in our book right next to where Seeley would have been. It's basically in the same position where he is, fighting all around that on July 3rd. They're in the cannonade. The signal guns that signal the cannonade are from the Washington Artillery for July 3rd, 1863. And wouldn't you know that you've got these two men that are affiliated with it, both born in the state of Ohio. By the way, the head of the Washington Artillery, Benjamin Eshelman, is from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Maybe we'll do him next time we do Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. The head of the Washington Artillery is from Pennsylvania. So there's all kinds of transplants there. So these men are going to be fighting here on July 3rd, 1863, and eventually Owen will get on a staff position. He'll end the American Civil War. He surrenders at Appomattox, and he will go back to New Orleans. His brother Edward goes to New York City. And Edward is buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, which is a very famous cemetery. A lot of people are there. And William is in the cemetery in New Orleans, right here at the bottom. And this is the same cemetery, everybody, that John Bell Hood is in. That Dick Taylor, the son of President the President Zachary Taylor, Dick Taylor, who was a Confederate general in the Civil War, also in this cemetery here. But these guys are all Ohioans. They're Ohioans fighting for the Confederate Army in the Battle of Gettysburg on July 3rd. Now, right across from the Washington Artillery, our last story here for today will be that of Azor Nickerson. The 8th Ohio is on the far right of the Union line for July 3rd, 1863. Nickerson has a terrific career, a very, very interesting story. He is a first lieutenant of Company I of the 8th Ohio here in the Battle of Gettysburg. He's from Medina, Ohio, and then moved to Elyria, which is up in the northeast corner of the state. So we've had him from all around now. I'm showing you from Central Part, showing you from down in Cincinnati, from up in the northern part of the state. So you saw Seeley up in Ashtabula, way up in the corner. And here at Medina, this is where Azor Nickerson is born. And he joins the 8th Ohio Infantry in 1861. He goes into the Shenandoah Valley. He is with the 8th Ohio attacking the sunken road at the Battle of Antietam when he is shot in the breast and shoulder area. It takes a severe bullet wound there, attacking the sunken road with French's division on September 17, 1862. And he'll miss the fall, miss the Battle of Fredericksburg, and then return to the Army in January 1863. And then he will be here at the Battle of Gettysburg commanding his company along Emmitsburg Road. You know, the 8th Ohio are out skirmishing along where the Emmitsburg Road is located for July 3rd, 1863. Here is a map of it from Jim and I's work. Here's the 8th Ohio going right out here. Of course, everybody we were just talking about is up off the map over here. That's there. So he actually, Nickerson later describes this. He writes an article for Scribner's Magazine, and the article comes out in July of 1893, and it's called Two Visits to Gettysburg. So he survives the Civil War, and writes about it. And he says that he's out there in the middle of this when the cannonade starts. Then when the advance starts, he's out there under fire. And he wants to change his unit. He said, I thought a change of location, no matter how slight, might take me out of their immediate range. This is the immediate range of Confederate guns. Certainly it could not be worse. So I dragged myself a short distance only to find it was a worse place. Then by supreme sacrifice, I had been shot through one arm and through the lungs. I struggled to my feet and started to run until he fainted and collapsed out there. So he had this bullet wound at Antietam. He got hit in the arm at Gettysburg as well as getting shot in the chest. This was just a devastating wound. And he goes back to the field hospital for the 2nd Union Army Corps where he was at. Now Jim and I, when we put this together, I had part of a story and Jim had part of the story and put it together. His part was Nickerson, so I'm borrowing his section from for this. But Azor Nickerson, badly wounded here in the Battle of Gettysburg, collapses after trying to run to be shot through the lungs there. And then here's his pension record. Look at the wounds on his body, everybody. So I showed you Seeley. This is one tough guy, okay? No matter what you say about Nickerson, this guy was tough. These are the wounds in his body from Antietam and Gettysburg. Now, he recovers sufficiently enough to be carried to the train station. And he's put down on a stretcher in front of the train station. That's what he says. It's there. Then he gets sent down to Washington, D.C. And on November 19, ladies and gentlemen, he's waiting, before November 19, November 18, he's waiting for orders, recovering from wounds, to see if he'll still be fit for duty. He's got to go in front of a board to see if he can go back on duty. So he's waiting around in Washington, D.C., awaiting orders, because he's got to go in front of this board to see if he's fit for duty. So what's he do? He and his buddy get on a train, and they go to the Gettysburg Address. And they get up to Hanover Junction, where they come in on the train east of Gettysburg, and they come on the same train that Ohio and its delegation are coming to Gettysburg to. Now, he and his buddy, they're both Ohioans that are there. He finds out the governor of Ohio is on the train. He gets a special introduction to the governor. Now, he knows a lot of people, but he gets a special introduction to the governor, and the governor makes him and his buddy the governor's aides and gives them invitations to come to Gettysburg Address and sit on the platform. Okay? So we're going to put Nickerson in with the Ohio delegation of the National Cemetery, and there is no delegation, probably no one that had more people on the platform for the Gettysburg Address than the state of Ohio. Ohio had the most governors there. 3 of its governors were there. And you say, how could that happen? Former governor was there, the current sitting governor was there, and the governor-elect was there, because the governor term was only 2 years at the time of the Civil War. All 3 of them were there. And if you blow up the pictures of the Gettysburg Address, you can find the governor at the time of the Gettysburg Address, Governor David Todd. You can find him in the pictures. And he absolutely is unmistakable. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Here are the 3 governors: William Dennison, former governor, Governor David Todd, the sitting governor of Ohio at the time Lincoln gave a Gettysburg Address, and Governor John Brow, the governor-elect. And Look here, here's Governor Curtin of Ohio. Look at Governor Todd right there. Look at this little curlicue there. See that? That's how you can tell. You know he's there. There he is right there. Abraham Lincoln reportedly goes over here. Nickerson is somewhere up here. Who knows where he is? He's somewhere on the platform. Lincoln talks to Governor Brow, who is seated elsewhere on the platform. And then, or Governor Dennison, I'm sorry. Governor Dennison's elsewhere. Governor Todd and Governor Brow are seated together. And Lincoln talks to them, gets introduced to them. Not sure if he knew them before. Looks like he may have been introduced in person to them for the first time. But he basically makes a comment, I'm paraphrasing, when he meets all three of these governors. How many governors can Ohio possibly have? What the president reportedly says right here. But Nickerson's at the Gettysburg Address. He has a tremendous career. He meets and befriends George Crook, who is a famous Indian fighter. He's from Dayton, Ohio, by the way. He's a graduate of West Point. And as time goes on, he builds a career up to 1880 that is pretty awesome there. He's at the Battle of Rosebud, which is before Little Bighorn. And then in 1880, he falls in love with his second wife's dressmaker. Let's see, make sure I can get this right here. So he actually falls in love with his wife's dressmaker. And unfortunately, he doesn't handle it very well. He wouldn't be the first person that things like this happen to, but he doesn't handle it very well. So he speaks to his present wife and sends her to Europe. And she says that she went to Europe to save money, to educate their daughter, because they had a younger daughter there, and for her health. She gives 3 reasons why she went. While she's in Europe, he files for divorce from her. Okay? And he claims abandonment in the divorce. Then he marries this other lady. Not kidding you. Marries the other lady. His wife finds out about it, comes back, and has that divorce decree set aside because he testified fraudulently. Okay? There. And she then files for divorce. But he is going to be up on charge. He's going to be, a warrant's going to be put out for his arrest. He's going to be charged with conduct unbecoming, and he's going to risk a court-martial, and he flees to Canada, actually goes to Canada. And he stays there for quite a considerable amount of time. His second wife gets that divorce, and he marries the dressmaker to be his third wife there. And he spends many years, he's up in Canada, then he tries to get some of this commission back, and he can't do it. Unfortunately for him, these bad choices led to a bad end to his career. And he doesn't die until much, much later, so well after 1900 when he dies. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And right before his death, a bill is passed to Congress to restore him to the rank of lieutenant colonel, basically. So he had been a captain. He had a pension. He lost his pay as a retired Army officer. Then he filed for a pension, which he got, and his third wife eventually ended up getting it. But a lot of this, they were going to, pretty bad. It looked like a deal was cut to let him resign from the from the retired list from the Army. And he didn't get restored in rank until after 1900. He got restored in rank much later. That's there. And today, he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. But a brilliant soldier, a brave man who made some bad choices later in his life, and he paid for it, basically, for the rest of his life. An Ohio soldier here in the Battle of Gettysburg. Lessons, that these stories are just fascinating to me. And these are people. They're people just like you and me. They have human frailties. They make human mistakes, just like you and I do. So that's what makes their story interesting, because they're not perfect folks. That's here. So you just heard about 6 Ohioans in the Battle of Gettysburg and what they did here. 2 Confederates actually got into that presentation, everybody. And I'm going to leave you with the wise words of Wilbur Wright. Everybody ought to know, right? Begin life in Ohio. That's what you got to do. If you do that, you're in good shape. Guy who discovered this people, I love to look at North Carolina. It's a first in flight on their license plate. Come on, those guys are all Ohioans. That bicycle shop for the Wright brothers is in Dayton. Flight was invented in Dayton, everybody. Ohioans at Gettysburg, ladies and gentlemen, Buckeyes at Gettysburg. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll take questions.